Welcome to Outside Views Politics 101. Today we're diving into one of the most dynamic and debated aspects of modern politics, and that's identity politics. This term often sparks strong emotions, from passionate support to outright criticism, but what does it really mean? More importantly, how do race, gender, and sexual orientation play into the rise and impact of political movements centered on identity? To understand identity politics, we need to begin with its roots. The concept emerged from the civil rights movements of the mid-20th century. Marginalized groups, be it by race, gender, or sexual orientation, began organizing around shared experiences of oppression. And these movements aimed to address systemic inequalities and demand representation in political and social systems that had excluded them for centuries. The civil rights movements in the United States is a key example. Led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., it organized African Americans around their shared experience of racial discrimination, pushing for legal equality and the end of segregation. This was identity politics in action, even if it wasn't called that at the time. Similarly, the women's liberation movement in the 1960s and 70s fought for gender equality, challenging societal norms that confined women to traditional roles. Then came the LGBTQ rights movement, which sought to dismantle the stigma and the legal barriers facing people based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. At its core, identity politics is about recognizing that people's lived experiences, shaped by factors like race, gender, and sexual orientation, impact their position in society and their access to rights and opportunities. And these shared experiences often become a rallying point for political action. Now, let's explore the role of race in identity politics. Race has been, as I said, one of the most visible and impactful dimensions of identity in political movements. Historically, racial identity has been weaponized to enforce systems of oppression, from slavery and colonization to segregation and racial profiling. Movements like Black Lives Matter, which emerged in the 2010s, show how race continues to be a central issue in identity politics. Black Lives Matter began as a response to police violence and systemic racism against African Americans. It became a global movement, raising awareness and sparking debates about race, justice, and equality. Critics often accuse such movements of being divisive. However, supporters argue that acknowledging racial inequities is essential to addressing them. Ignoring race, they say, perpetuates a system that benefits some while marginalizing others. Moving on to gender. The role of gender in identity politics has been equally transformative. Feminist movements have long used gender as a lens to critique societal structures. Early waves of feminism focused on issues like voting rights and workplace equality. In more recent years, the focus has expanded to include intersectionality, recognizing that women's experiences are shaped not only by gender but also by race, class, and other factors. For example, the Me Too movement highlighted the pervasive issue of sexual harassment and assault. It became a platform for women and men to share their stories and demand accountability. Like other identity-driven movements, it faced backlash. Critics questioned its methods and arguing it risked undermining due process. But for supporters, Me Too was a necessary reckoning with power dynamics and systemic abuse. Gender identity has also become a major battleground in identity politics. Transgender rights, for instance, have become a focal point in debates over healthcare, sports participation, and legal protections. These debates often highlight the tension between advancing equality and navigating deeply ingrained societal norms. And now let's talk about sexual orientation. The LGBTQ+ rights movement is one of the most prominent examples of identity politics shaping policy and public opinion. For decades, people were marginalized because of who they loved or how they identified. Identity politics gave them a voice and a platform to fight for change. The legalization of same-sex marriage in many countries is one of the movement's most visible achievements. But the fight isn't over. Issues like anti-discrimination laws, access to gender-affirming healthcare, and protections for LGBTQ+ youth remains contentious. Critics of identity politics often argue that it fragments society. They say it pits one group against another, creating division instead of unity. And some suggest that focusing on universal policies like healthcare or education would better serve everyone without emphasizing specific identities. However, proponents of identity politics counter that universal policies often fail to address systemic inequities. For example, a universal healthcare system might exist, but without addressing racial biases in medical treatment, marginalized groups could still face worse outcomes. Similarly, equal pay laws might exist, but without tackling gender norms around caregiving, women might still earn less than men on average. So where does this leave us? Identity politics is both a tool and a challenge. It's a tool because it empowers marginalized groups to demand justice and representation. It shines a light on inequities that might otherwise go unnoticed. But it's also a challenge because it forces societies to grapple with uncomfortable truths. It raises questions about how to balance group identities with broader notions of national or global unity. The future of identity politics is likely to remain contentious. As societies become more diverse, the need to address identity-based inequalities will only grow. But so will the debates about how to do so effectively. So in conclusion, identity politics isn't going anywhere. It's a powerful force in modern political movements, shaping debates on race, gender, and sexual orientation. Whether you view it as a source of empowerment or division, its impact is undeniable. So thank you for joining me on Outside Views Politics 101 again. And if you found this exploration thought-provoking, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's keep the conversation going. See you next time, and the next video is already right here in the end screen.